Everyone. I'm very excited to have Erika here with us again to help us learn more about the Canary Islands, which I know very little about. So thanks again for signing on this beautiful summer day in Portland or wherever you're signed on from. And yeah, go ahead, Erika.
Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you, Nancy, for having me here. I'm going to be talking about the Canary Islands. I have been here before. I'm the managing director of Quest Travel Adventures, and we specialize in the Atlantic Island group. So before we were talking about the Azores and Madeira. Today we'll talk about the Spanish Canary Islands, which are also located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, about 900 miles to the southwest of Spain. So we have some cool pictures here, and I'll talk about all of those in just a minute. First, just a little update on tourism and health situation in the Canary Islands. The good news is, as of Monday of this week, Spain is open for travel. They've created a travel health portal for visitors who are vaccinated. This news was only announced on Monday, so information is kind of coming out daily. So we're not exactly sure what it's going to look like yet, but you can start booking your trip safely. The Canary Islands themselves are reporting less than 200 active cases of COVID across all of their islands. So it's a relatively safe, relatively not very contagious destination. Also, as many other countries did in response to the pandemic, to start putting standards in place to make visitors feel safe, the Spanish government created the Safe Tourism Certified Seal of Approval, which you see here. And this is for accommodations, tour companies, restaurants, any tour-related business. That means that they've met the new higher standards of hygiene and cleanliness set out by the program. So you'll see this seal as you research trips on a website or when you visit a facility. Okay, so looking at a map here, where are the Canary Islands located? The easiest way to get there is via flight from Madrid. There are like 6 flights a day from Madrid. There's flights from Barcelona, there's flights from Lisbon, there's flights from Paris. So while Madrid has the most amount of flights and generally has the best connections, you can combine the Canary Islands with a lot of different destinations. I actually just put together a package for someone who wanted to combine the Canary Islands with Italy. It's a little crazy because they're not really near each other, but to each their own. There are airports on almost every island, and some islands have more than one. Okay, so here we can see all of the islands. The Canary Islands have 8 total in their archipelago. They have an estimated population of 2 million across all 8 islands, and just under 2 million of those residents live on the island of Tenerife, which you see right in the middle, which is the biggest, and Gran Canaria, which you see also right in the middle, which is the capital island. Their tourism, almost 14 million tourists visit the island every year, but the US makes up less than 10% of those numbers. So this is not a destination where you're going to run into other American travelers, and certainly not your neighbors, and you could be the first in your group to go there because it's really a new destination for American travelers. Now, fun fact, I'm not sure if any of you counted the number of islands on the screen, but there are only 7. The smallest island of Graciosa is not always mentioned as part of the Canary Islands. So someplace you'll see they say they have 7, someplace you see they say they have 8. The small island of Graciosa really only recently started to be recognized when the 700 residents that lived there started saying, hey, we're an island too, because they wanted a little bit of tourism support. The island has no paved roads. It has no official accommodations for tourists, and it is the only island that does not have an airport. If it's actually kind of on this map, you'll see just to the north part of Lanzarote, they just call it Lanzarote, but it is technically a 25-minute ferry. It is considered its own island, and you can actually go and camp there if you want, or you can go for a day trip, as it has great beaches. It's pretty much an entirely beach island, fishing, snorkeling, sunbathing. So taking away this map, most of tonight I am going to focus on the island of Tenerife right in the middle, as in our travel experiences we've been putting together packages we found that Tenerife is kind of the best suited for the American traveler who kind of wants to get the understanding of the destination in kind of maybe one visit. Tenerife is known as the island of eternal springs, which you see right here. That's because they say that the weather there is never too hot and never too cold. It's averages around 70 degrees year round. And it's good. It's a good life. So if we can picture in our mind the volcanic landscapes of Maui combined with the food and the wine, architecture, Spanish colonial feel of Barcelona, and combine that with nature, adventure, beaches, and the tropical feel of Costa Rica, put those three images in our head, and you actually have the small island of Tenerife. All of those things exist on this small island. The photo here that you see is Mount Teide, which is right in the center of the island. And this is a real photo, not photoshopped, which I'm going to say a couple times tonight because there's a really incredible landscape here. So this means, looking at this photo, that especially towards the end of February, you may see a snow-capped mountain and a beach in the same photo. So you can lie on the beach and throw snowballs in the same day. I'm going to talk more about Mount Teide in just a bit. So from the north side of the island to the south side of the island, it's about an hour and a half if you just navigate directly. There's an airport in the north and there's an airport in the south. So usually when people are flying there, I say pick the best schedule because they're not that far apart. If you wanted to circumnavigate the entire island, you're looking at about 6 hours of driving. Sorry, the north is a bit more developed in terms of history buffs, agriculture, industry, think wine. And the south then has these beautiful white sand beaches that you see, a little bit more tourism relative to the island. But what you can do is combine an itinerary where you're staying in the island, either a couple of days in the south and a couple of days in the north, or you stay in the south and you visit the north. And even though they're only an hour and a half apart, it's almost like visiting two separate islands. It is important to remember when we look at this gorgeous picture that this is the Atlantic island. So while you will get locals who swim any day of the year, the ocean is a bit cool. So it's not going to be Caribbean temperatures like what you have if you ever vacation south of here. But a lot of us are from the north, so if you go to Gloucester Beach, it's kind of the same, or Maine, wherever you are. Mount Teide National Park, which was in the original picture, is in the middle of the Teide National Park, which is classified UNESCO site. It stands at just over 12,000 feet. It is technically still an active volcano, but the last eruption was over 100 years ago in 1909. It is considered the highest point in Spain. And what's interesting is what you see here in this photo happens pretty regularly, and it's the shadow of the mountain casting down at sunset over what they call the Sea of Clouds. Because of the high elevation, the clouds develop, the sun setting hits the mountain, and then creates this natural shadow on the Sea of Clouds. Super cool. Part of the reason that it's classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site is that it has over 800 different species of flora. As you can see here, some really unique cactus style. They come in different colors. And then the terrain that you see around here is said to be similar to Mars. So they've had NASA rovers come and explore and test out how they're going to do on different terrain, because it's a mixture of like old volcanic rock, and then the high mountain elevation dries it out and just it creates something that you don't get in a lot of places in the world. The park is also known for stargazing because it has such high elevation, and it is in the middle of the island. As the island developed, everything was around the beaches, around the bottom. It has very little light pollution. So this has become one of the top 3 stargazing locations in the world in terms of accessibility. This photo, again, actual photo taken by one of our guests, not photoshopped. This can be seen with the natural eye because there is so little light pollution. So a very popular activity is when you do something called sunset and stargazing. So you take the drive to the top of Mount Teide, which is usually about an hour and a half from either the north or the south, just because of some of the switchback roads, and you have to go slower to get to the top. You have sunset, where you get to watch the sunset over the sea of clouds. You then have a little tapas dinner at the only restaurant that is above the clouds. And then you get to do the stargazing. You basically see, as we say, the sun sets and the stars rise. So as the evening sky appears, often there's an astronomer that comes and will start pointing out some of the constellations and some of the things that you'll be seeing as the stars are rising. And in this next picture, you may be lucky enough, depending on time of the year and clarity, to see the Milky Way rising. So it's a really, really unique destination where you've got all these activities combined together. Okay, sorry. Activity-wise.
I have a question, Erika.
Go for it.
Are there hiking trails too, if you rather hike to get to the top? Or
there are hiking trails. There's a couple here. Let me just go backwards and show you here. So there's a couple hiking trails within the national park that you can do on your own. There is also, from where that restaurant is that I told you, the one restaurant, it's a hotel, but it's a very basic hotel because it's used for campers. You can take a gondola ride up to almost the top. And so you can kind of go all the way up and almost all the way up. Then there is a hike that you can do all the way to the summit, because there's no truly outlined trail, and because if there is snow, any trail markers that exist get buried. They don't encourage that you do that without a guide, and so you have to have a permit at least, so that they know who's ascending and descending on which day, and they just make sure they don't lose anybody. So you can go all the way to the top. You can also do a lot of hiking just naturally in the national park along some of the really cool terrain, and you can also take the gondola up to the top.
Thanks.
No problem. So really awesome family destination. Besides all the activities that we talked about, and there are more to come, Tenerife has the #1 voted water park in the world. It's called CM Park. It is much less commercialized and much less visited compared to anything you'll find in Florida. And it uses a lot of the natural surrounding to kind of integrate the flora into these water adventures that they have. One of their water adventures even comes down from a high peak, and as you go shooting down on the water slide, you actually go through a shark tank. So as a visitor, you can also stand on the exterior and observe the shark tank, and then observe people shooting through it in the tube. So it's fun. Also on the island is the #1 rated zoo in Europe. It's called Laurel Park, originally set out to be a bird sanctuary. People started, or other zoos or other animal foundations started sending injured birds to the destination, and then started sending injured other animals, and it kind of just grew because they were known to have some of the best animal doctors. It's one of the few places in the world you can still see the clan of blue parrots, and it's very, very clean is what I would say compared to many other zoos that I've been to in the world. Whale and dolphin watching. Because of its location in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, they get migrating whales that are coming through, as well as pods of dolphins that are living around the islands. Pilot whales are the most common whales, and there are so many of them that they're often seen from shore, so you don't have to go very far out in the water in order to get a glimpse of the whales or the dolphins. Along with whale and dolphin watching, there are a ton of water-related activities. Snorkeling and scuba diving are very popular, fishing. Some of the beaches have surfing, kayaking, paddleboarding, kind of anything that you would want to do that has to do with the ocean. They've got it in the Canary Islands. And speaking of paddleboarding, one of the cool features and activities to do is to visit the base of the Los Gigantes cliffs. You can kind of see the beginning of them right here. They translate to the giants, and these cliffs rise almost 200 feet from the ocean to the top. We like to say these are the lesser known Cliffs of Moher of the Canary Islands. They create a very dramatic seascape on the western side of the island. And it's really neat that they can be seen kind of from underneath right here, paddleboarding, boating, as you see the gentleman in the boat, kayaking, as well as you can take a car, go to the top, and you can actually walk along. There are some paths that lead along the top of the cliffs as well. There will be a slide at the end where you can actually see the full cliffs. So this is an island of adventure, along with relaxing on the beach, doing some cultural activities. They say in Tenerife, if you can think it, you'll find it here. So paragliding, biking, hiking, lava tube exploring, all of the water activities I mentioned. If there's an activity you think you might want to do, it is probably in the Canary Islands. In terms of biking, many of the Tour de France competitors train here in the winter season because it never gets too cold for them to ride. And it's great for them to be able to have the flatter rides along the coast to work up in terms of distance. And then the more extreme rides going up the mountain to work out endurance. So as I mentioned before, the north and the south side of the island, while only an hour and a half by car, are very different. So here we go to the northeast side of the island, and we have yet another UNESCO site. This is Anaga Forest Biosphere. From the beach to the jungle, this forest is said to have the largest laurel forest in Spain, and it plays host to many of the endemic plants. It is a very humid area. It has really high mountain ranges that go down into deep ravines and then lead all the way down to the beach. This is a great place for nature lovers and for photographers interested in specific nature. I love this picture because you see the gigantic ferns as well as the tree behind this photographer, which is actually a rhododendron. It's a very old rhododendron. It's something that the island is very unique to having. And as you can also see from the ferns, not a Photoshop picture, but some of those ferns are the same size as the photographer. And then totally changing around, got to talk about golf, another activity another activity on the island. Kind of as I said before, if you can dream up the activity, you can probably find it on Tenerife. There are 9 different courses on the island, many of which are top rated, including a course that has been used in many competitions located at the Ritz-Carlton Resort. They've been very artistically designed and trying to work with what they have on the island. Many of the dunes and bunkers that are there will have both the black and white sand. And then on this course specifically, they feature some of the original parts of the land, like the terraced banana plantation walls, and then the old trees that were there. So because of the perfect weather, golf is available year round. So you get a lot of people that will come here for golf and try to get in like 10 rounds in 1 week. So going back to UNESCO, we've got the UNESCO Park on the top of Mount Teide, you've got the UNESCO Bioreserve in Anaga Forest, and now you've got the UNESCO World Heritage Site of La Laguna. La Laguna is an old Spanish colonial town that used to be the main center for trading of goods for travelers passing through, going back as early as the 15th century. They say it was the last point for travelers who were leaving Europe in search of the new world to the west. So they got a lot of people back and forth, which lended to a lot of the influences of things that came out of the Canary Islands. In February of each year, Tenerife plays host to the second largest carnival in the world after Rio de Janeiro. They have huge festivals in the north side of the island in the capital of Santa Cruz. And here you can see the Carnival Queen from a few years ago crowned with a very, very ornate headpiece, which is done on the last day of the ceremonies and procession made through town. There are also during the summer local festivals in each of the villages. So from June to September, almost every weekend, one of the town hosts what they call a traditional romeria. What that means is that the locals get dressed up in the local Canarian clothes. They sing local Canarian songs. They do parades through the street. They feature what they call street food, which is basically their really good food, but served on the street. And then they have competitions of different art. So in one town, it's sand art. In another town, it's giant murals. And each town has their weekend of festivities and competition during the summer. And then I'd be remiss if I did not mention the gastronomy on the island. And this goes throughout all of the Canary Islands. The one thing that is very different about Tenerife is actually, well, two things actually. First would be featured in this picture is the honey. And a lot of people don't know this about the Canary Islands, but because of the very unique flora, the honey production coming out of the Canary Islands has a very unique flavor, and people consider it just completely different from something you'll get somewhere else. Interestingly enough, bees that work on this honey production are some of the few insects that are found on the island. Because the islands are so isolated and because of the winds, the trade winds that blow through the islands, there are very few insects in the Canary Islands. Think specifically mosquitoes. You can go to the Canary Islands and not have to worry about mosquitoes. Tapas are certainly a big thing in true Spanish tradition on the Canary Islands, but there's a lot of Mediterranean influences as well as South American, because the trade went back and forth, and it was the last point that the people exploring to the west were kind of stopping at to get supplies and trade. It was also one of the first points for people coming back from South America heading to mainland Europe. So there's a very unique mix of flavors and styles as you mix kind of traditional Spanish with a little bit of the Northern African, with a little bit of the South American, and then kind of mix it together to everything that they've come up with. Obviously, being an island, tons of seafood, many seaside restaurants. Food is pretty reasonable priced because so much of it is local, and always has very interesting seasonings. What's unique about all the islands in the Canary Islands is that overall the destination is really casual. But in terms of restaurant, you get a casual seaside restaurant like this one here, where they've built the terrace on the basalt rock. And then you also have a couple Michelin-starred restaurants on the island where they take the concept of the Canarian food and just highlight it to a much higher level. So depending on how you like to eat, whether you want to kind of get down and dirty in the towns, or whether you actually want super refined, really kind of thought out bites of food, there's something for everyone. Because it is a destination that mixes a lot of different people, again, between the Spanish, between the tourists, between the North Africans, you get almost every kind of food on the island. So it's not rare to see restaurants from just about every nationality represented on the island. So one of the little known facts about Tenerife is that it is home to some of the world's most award-winning wines. And there are certain varietals of grapes that are only found in the Canary Islands. So back in the late 1800s, during the phylloxera aphid epidemic, also known as the Great Wine Blight in Europe, many of the grape varietals on the mainland got wiped out due to the bugs devouring the vines. Canary Islands, because they were so isolated and they already had started growing these same wines, were not harmed at all. And like I said, very few bugs on the island. So you now find varietals in the Canary Islands that are not found anywhere else. There are 7 specifically named varietals on the island that do win awards every single year at competitions. So this is really just a great view. It's from one of our favorite wineries called Bodega Monje, where the grapes are planted on the side of the mountain. So they start higher and they're basically planted all the way down to the sea. So this view where they've set it up is the background of their tasting room. So while you're there tasting a bunch of their wines and then tasting some of the tapas that they put to go along with it, this is the view that you constantly have in your on the background. What's really neat, again, because the island and the way it developed with the mountain in the middle and all the development around, is that you find that almost everywhere you go on the island, you can orient yourself based on where you see the mountain in the background. So as I mentioned before, lots of stargazing, lots of activities, excuse me, beaches, the water sports. I didn't talk before, Puerto de la Cruz is a town up in the north where they have an orchid botanical garden, multiple vineyards, again, activities like ATV, hiking, paragliding, jeep tours, the cable ride, the cable car up to the top of Mount Teide. Lava caves are here, just similar to what we see in the other Atlantic islands where the lava formed outside of an air bubble. So there's a lot to do, whether you're a doer or whether you just want to sit on the beach, also something that you can totally do. And again, because there's good weather year round, even if you decide to go here in January, which is considered the height of their winter season, you're still probably going to get temperatures that are around 50, 55 degrees. I'm in Boston, so that seems balmy to me in the winter. Time to break out the t-shirt. So it is a year-round destination. So some of the other islands that I haven't talked about that are worth talking about. Tenerife is really the best developed for, like I said, the American market, or what we would like to do. Things gives you the best like one-stop destination to get to know the most of the Canary Islands. Gran Canaria, which is the capital island of the group, has been developed a lot by German tourists who tend to be a bit more interested in the party than in the history and culture. With that said, we love the island. We always create tours with the island, but it is not, when people think of Canary Islands, they often think of Gran Canaria, and it doesn't give the best single representation of the destination. So we have a tour that we call our 2-island tour, and this is probably one of the most popular choices when visiting, because the whole time you're there, you can stay on the island of Tenerife, you can visit the north of Tenerife, you can visit the south of Tenerife, and then you can visit La Gomera Island. Now, La Gomera Island is a 90-minute ferry from Tenerife to La Gomera. This is an awesome ferry ride because you can even consider it a whale and dolphin watching excursion, as the marine life is so present on the islands that it's not unheard of to see whales and dolphins as you're just on this ferry going from one island to another. Often a visit to La Gomera is done on a jeep tour, on a full day jeep tour. And what happens is they will come pick you up at your hotel in a jeep. They will drive you to the ferry. You will get on the ferry on the jeep. You will have your 90-minute ride where we recommend you go up on top deck and look for the whales. Then you get back on the jeep, you disembark onto La Gomera Island, and then you do a full tour of the island. La Gomera Island can somewhat be called a mini Tenerife because, as you can see in this picture, you kind of have a peak in the middle, and this peak does help orient sometimes whether you're where exactly you are, lava formed as well. You've got great hiking through their national forest, where they also have a lot of laurel trees. The local town of San Sebastian has a house that was originally owned by Christopher Columbus, as this was one of his stops when he was traveling between countries. So there's a lot of culture there. And then probably the most unique thing to La Gomera is their local whistling language. It's called El Silbo. And this was used to communicate across the deep ravines from one community to the other that were built in the hills. And so when you go there, there's some of the locals, it is considered kind of a dying language because there's not as many elder locals that are using this whistling language, but they do demonstrations of it, and they're trying to get more of the younger La Gomerian community to learn this language. So stay a little longer at a third island. The island that we like to add as a third island is Lanzarote. Lanzarote is the third most populated in the Canaries after Tenerife and Gran Canaria. But considering Tenerife and Gran Canaria have just under 1 million residents each, Lanzarote only has 150,000. It's shaped like a cucumber. It's really narrow and really long. It's only about an hour flight from the north part of Tenerife, and it has kind of a flatter, a little bit more rolling terrain. There is a low-level volcano on the island located in Timanfaya National Park, which is on the southern part of the island. And it's often referred to as the desert of the Canary Islands because it's just these landscapes where you don't have a lot growing, you have a lot of volcanic residue, you have a lot of dirt. The volcano is technically still active, although again, hasn't erupted in over 100 years. But there's a lot of geothermal activity. And in this desert, there's a restaurant called El Diablo because it's considered one of the hottest parts on the restaurant, on the national park. And they harness the natural geothermal heat to cook your food on a grill that basically they don't have to pay for because it's all the natural geothermal heat. And then you have the background of this volcanic desert terrain. On the north side of the island, you'll find the traditional village of Teguise, where they have an excellent market. They have a really great museum of sacred art dedicated to the Canaries, and some very interesting traditional colonial architecture, which includes the oldest building that is still standing in the Canary Islands, which was built in 1455. So I may have gone too fast and spoken too much, but this just gives you a little more time to ask questions. This is an awesome destination. It is, like I said, really, really undiscovered. Very few American tourists going there. On our website, we have a lot of examples of itineraries. They can be kind of created exactly as is. We can customize things. Nancy has sent us individual travelers. She's done small groups together. So there's a lot of options when going here, and there's a lot of options whether you want to add it on with the mainland or just go to the Canary Islands. And I definitely recommend just going to the Canary Islands because there's enough to do there that you could be there for 2 weeks and not get bored. But a lot of people do like to do, one of the islands and then Madrid, or one of the islands in Barcelona, or there's great connections coming through Lisbon as well. So Quest Travel, Atlantic Island Specialists, Spanish Canary Islands, Portuguese, Azores, Madeira, and Cabo Verde. I think I heard Nancy saying at the beginning of this that she is putting together a group to the Azores in the fall that's doing some tea exploration. So I can't help but plug that one a little bit as well. But I'd like to open it up, see if you guys have questions. If there's more I can tell you, maybe I have some other slides. Oh, and the picture in the upper right-hand corner here is the Los Gigantes Cliffs. Again, about 2,000 feet from the ocean to the top there. Questions?
Hi, Erika. This is Ellen.
Hi, Ellen.
How are you?
I'm doing great today. Very excited to share this.
Yeah, this is great. I missed it a little bit, but I was wondering how long is the flight? How far is it from the U.S.? And is Boston the best way to go?
So from the U.S., there are no direct flights going into the Canary Islands. You have to connect through a European city. The easiest connection, whether it's Boston, New York, or even like Chicago, Atlanta, go from the U.S. into Madrid, and then Madrid down to the Canary Islands. Madrid has generally 6, sometimes 8 flights a day on Iberia. So it's a very easy connection point. From Boston and from Newark, I've done connections through Lisbon on tap, which people really like because you can say then, oh, I went to Portugal and Spain, even though you didn't go to mainland Spain. But then almost every major European capital has a flight to the Canary Islands. I think.
So, Erika, how long is the flight, say, from Madrid to Tenerife?
The flight from Madrid to Tenerife is 2.5 hours, 3 hours, just so it's not that bad. Can you still see this? It's not a great slide here, but you can kind of see the routing here. And it is about that same amount if you're going from Barcelona, from Lisbon, or even as far up as Paris, just because of how they direct the flights. So it's 2.5 to 3 hours. They're easy flights, and again, multiple connections a day. And as you can see here, it's southern Morocco.
Your screen sharing stopped.
Oh, okay then. Let's try again. No, whoopsie daisy. I don't know what I did, so I'm gonna try again. Sorry about that, guys. So here you can kind of see the general layout of where the Canary Islands are, just in relation to Spain. The latitude longitude is right off of the southern Morocco. They're actually the furthest easternmost island is only about 50 miles from the shore of Morocco, which makes it actually a combination that you can also do with Marrakesh or Casablanca if you wanted to combine those destinations as well. But Madrid is definitely the easiest connection, as there are so many flights a day that go from Madrid down to the Canaries.
And is there a rainy season at all, or is it pretty much consistently the same weather all year round?
Winter is considered rainy season, so you're going to have more rains December, January, February than any other time of the year. But overall, it's a very mild season, just because of its location, because of the natural winds. It doesn't. It rarely rains for long periods of time, as opposed to some of the other Atlantic islands. It definitely, many of the islands have more of a desert terrain. It's much drier, with kind of humid pockets set up where the flora has kind of grown more intense, and where the ravines are, with the mountains kind of descending into the valleys.
And do you know what they're known for as far as produce, or can they grow almost anything?
They can grow almost anything. I would say that, again, the number one product coming out of the Canaries is probably their wine. One of the unique things you can do in the Canaries is visit a banana plantation. Those date back quite a bit. They do have some areas that grow oranges, but there's no major product coming out of the Canaries that overwhelms all other products. They export their honey, as I mentioned, but it's actually highly coveted, so it rarely makes it that far out of Spain. So it doesn't do a huge amount of exporting besides the wine.
Erika?
Yes.
Sherry here. If you were doing it and giving optimum time to Tenerife by itself, what would be the minimal number of days you would stay there? And number two, what other island would you take in if you had more time?
Sure. So Tenerife itself, I would say the minimum amount of time is probably 4 nights. I feel like if you're not there for at least 4 nights, you just can't get settled enough to enjoy the pace of life. 5 nights, you can very easily visit La Gomera on that day trip that we talked about. So that's just a very easy trip, because then you have 5 nights, you don't unpack your suitcase, and you just do that one long day tour that includes the ferry over. Besides Tenerife, my personal favorite is probably Lanzarote. I love how the kind of volcanic terrain melts right into the beach. So it's just a little bit of a different vibe, where Tenerife is so mountainous. And so you have the peak of the mountain, and then you have all the beaches along the exterior, and Lanzarote is much flatter. So you almost have that desert terrain that just melts right into the beaches.
Thank you.
Tenerife does have the best food, though. Everyone you talk to that's been to multiple islands will tell you that that's where the food, the gastronomy in the Canaries has developed the best. What's unique about Tenerife that's different from some of the other islands, like I mentioned, Gran Canaria was certainly developed by the German market. You have all-inclusive hotels on Gran Canaria. You have a much better nightlife scene. So it's just a different vibe to the island. Tenerife, when they started developing and when they started becoming more popular, they actually passed a rule for a while that they didn't want to allow any more 3-star hotels. So you could only build a new hotel or renovate a hotel if it was going to be a 4 or 5-star hotel. And what that did is that it just elevated the type of tourism that was coming to the island. The northern part of Tenerife was definitely developed by the UK market. So if you're nervous at all about speaking Spanish, everybody in the north speaks English. When you go to the hotels in the north, it is not uncommon to hear English spoken but it's British English, it's not American English. And that's where the dark sand beaches are more in the north. There's a lot more kind of culture, history, gastronomy in the north. The south developed with the German market, with the UK market, with the Scandinavian market. And because of that, it really came to the beaches. So those northern countries that really wanted the beach concept, the southern part has those golden stretches of beaches and has a much more beach vibe. In the north, there's not as many hotels that are built on the beach because they're black sand beaches. On the south, you do have a number of hotels that are built on the beach because that's kind of what people came there for. But with all that in mind, there's still all the cultural activities, all the active activities, and then, you know, drive an hour and a half to the very northwest eastern point of the island, and you get that Inaga forest, and now you're in the rainforest. So the island itself just has so much to offer in different kind of pockets that you don't always feel like you're on the same island.
And how about the transportation from the north to the south? Would you recommend renting a car or just getting a transfer up there?
Yeah, so it depends on how you like to travel. There's actually a pretty good bus route that runs from the south area to the north area. The island itself, let's see if I can just skip one more slide here. So if you look in this middle island of Tenerife, the very southern tip that you see is where the beaches are. That's called Costa Adeje. The north, where you kind of see the like a little bit of a smiley face along the coast, that's where the black sand beaches are. And then the point that you see all the way out to the east, that is where the forest is. So there is a bus that runs along the eastern coast that basically starts in the south, runs along the eastern coast, and that curves into the kind of the north central spot. That's really easy and accessible. Driving on the island is pretty easy. Everything is well marked. It's the same side of the road as us. They're used to tourists, so they have a number of automatic car rentals, so that's not a problem. The only place where driving gets a little rocky is if you cut through the middle of the island going up to Mount Teide and then back down the other side. There are switchbacks. The road's just a little narrower. So it's not as fun to drive that as it is along the coastline. And then the western coast is not as developed just because it's a little bit more volcanic. So while the eastern side has more of a highway in terms of the drive, the western coast is a bit more rocky. And so the roads are one lane in each direction and just a little bit less maintained. But you can rent a car, you can use the public transport. And then taxis, surprisingly enough, aren't like, no one's going to be surprised if you order a taxi and then you say, I want to go to the north, and it's an hour taxi ride. Obviously it costs more, but like people do that all the time. Also, actually, sorry, just as a side note, the two family activities that I talked about, CM Park, which is in the south, and Laurel Park is in the north, they actually also offer shuttles directly to those locations from the south and from the opposite coast. So if you're on the south on the beach and you want to go to the zoo, you just have to time out when the zoo bus is leaving, which leaves from like, 5 different destinations in the south, goes right to the zoo and then back. And some people end up kind of doing that, and then they stay up in the towns in the north for a while, and then they can try to communicate with the water park bus to come back down.
What is the monetary unit?
It is part of Spain, so it is the euro.
It is euro.
Okay. And someone asked about the time zone. I put it in the chat, but does that, do they change with the daylight savings, or these?
They run on Spain's schedule. They're the same time zone as Spain, so they change when Spain changes.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's an island where, again, I always say I feel like a professional photographer, because there's always a really good shot to take that I didn't quite plan, but that ended up in my picture anyway because of the backdrop.
The nice thing about this destination that I've learned just now, that we could do it as a group, but it seems as though it would be a pretty good destination if you just had a friend or two that wanted to go. And Eric and I could help you coordinate the logistical part, the flights and the accommodations, and then it would be a lot of free time, I imagine, unless you wanted to do some of these guided tours here and there, right, Erica?
It is definitely an easy place to kind of do a little bit on your own. There's a lot of support here in terms of infrastructure on the island. It's developed the way a European city would be developed, and that's kind of how I talked about at the beginning. You've got these landscapes which remind you of Maui, and then you have the kind of setup and the colonial Spanish feeling of Barcelona. So the infrastructure is definitely set up closer to Barcelona as opposed to island infrastructure. And then, of course, the adventure, the beach, the kind of tropical feel of Costa Rica. So it's very unique. It's not like anywhere that I've been in the world in my travels, especially because it's so small. It's such a small, singular island.
Are there many different religions, or is it mostly Catholic or Muslim? What do you-
It's definitely not as Catholic as I would consider mainland Spain. Just because of development, it definitely has a Catholic presence. A lot of the festivals are based along the calendar, a religious calendar. But you have some interesting Jewish heritage that came through there, and you have some interesting Muslim heritage that came through there just because of the proximity to Morocco. So it is a bit more diverse, a little bit more like you might say southern Spain has a little bit of that same diversity, but because there were so many influences from the people who were using the island and the destination as a stopping point, as a refueling point, as a dropping off of goods and picking up of goods, it really had way more influences than your typical kind of territory, because it wasn't it wasn't truly owned by someone, I guess, even though it was owned by someone.
Well, I will say that just jumped up high on my list. Now, Morocco has been on my list, and I think this would be an amazing opportunity to mesh those two destinations together.
It is definitely surprising how easy it is. There's at least one flight a day coming from Marrakesh or coming from Casablanca. So we do get a lot of overlap with people who want to do those two destinations specifically, and then combine it with an island vibe of the Canary Islands. And again, you do see some of the influences from Northern Africa in the kind of dress and the food and just the general vibe of the island, even though it is definitely Spanish territory. So it's like Barcelona with a little bit more Northern African vibe.
So I know a lot of you are itching to go somewhere, and Ellen and I spoke with Erika last night, and because Ellen had the idea to go, her business is tea, Dobra Tea, downtown on Exchange Street in Portland, and the Azores has the tea plantation. And so this is my idea now is to say to you that want to go here, the Canary Islands or the Azores or anywhere else, I'm here to help you work that out. And be it just 2 or 3 people traveling together, or if you want to, like Ellen is, you want to jump in, Ellen, anytime you can.
Sure.
Thinking of getting a small group together so that that's based around the tea theme. So
Yes, yeah, definitely. I've had interest from customers at the tea room, so I'm that's why I contacted Nancy. I've had them interested in going to sit in a tea field and not, and try and travel around and learn about tea. So this is the easiest and closest tea garden really to the U.S. There are a couple tea gardens in the U.S., but none of them are really as developed, I guess, as this. They're very new, where the tea is still underdeveloped. So this is for the Camellia sinensis. This is the Azores are a great first entry into tea travel. If you're interested in that.
and on that trip, it's definitely going to be tea and a foodie tour and incorporating wine as well, because as Ellen said, wine and tea go together.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap between the Atlantic Island groups that make it really easy to talk about for me. And the slide I just put up here, this is a slide from the Azores presentation that shows the tea plantations that go from, higher in the mountains right down to the water. And similar to how we talk about the explorers who came through the Canary Islands, the Chinese settlers came through the Azores in the 1500s, planted these tea fields that were then kind of continuously cultivated. And now there are 2 tea plantations on the island, Chagoriana being the largest, that have been family owned and operated since the early 1800s, using some of the traditional equipment that the Chinese left there. And in the picture on the bottom left here, you actually see the women in the Azores hand sorting the tea, picking out the pieces that are not high enough quality for the green tea, which is, goes in one bag, and the full leaves go in another bag, and little bits and pieces go in the other section. So it's very unique to get into a factory that's been operating since for that long, which is history that the United States tea plantations just don't have.
Does anyone else have any questions about the Canary Islands or the Azores? Or I think Erika mentioned last night that Iceland is considered one of the Atlantic Islands, and so she is working with Iceland itineraries as well, and I'm familiar with Iceland too. So, but I will say, as far as value goes, the Azores and Canary Islands seem to be a much better value than Iceland.
I often say that Iceland is kind of cheap to get to. The flights are generally really reasonable. It's just very expensive to stay there. There's just less accommodation in terms of demand, and there's very little food that is actually locally produced. So much is flown in. So you can go to the bar in Iceland for a burger and a beer, and you can end up paying $40 or $50, which just seems outrageous. Whereas, Nancy will tell you, you could go out to dinner in the Azores and spoil yourself with appetizers, main dish, dessert, some of the local cheeses, a bottle of wine, some of the local, liqueur afterwards, and you're going to pay $50 for the full dinner, and bottle of wine. And so it goes both ways, whether you're going to spend your money on the flight to get there or whether you're going to spend your money with the experience in the destination. Canary Islands is more expensive than the Azores in the same way that Spain is generally more expensive than Portugal. But it's still, there's a lot of value, and you'll still find that Canary Islands is cheaper than mainland Spain or mainland Europe in general.
I know that when there were just 4 of us from the Portugal Women Walking in Wine tour that stopped at the Azores on the way home, and ended up in Terceira Island, and that had like an 8-hour layover. So we had a tour of the island, and then the guide dropped us off at this restaurant across from the airport, and I think it was 6 or 7 euros because it was the lunch special that included wine or beer, coffee or tea, the main course with the salad and a dessert, and 7 euros. So,
yeah, $10, you can't go wrong.
Really
Erika, you flashed that photo of the cheese. The cheese is really good in the Azores. It was so good.
I don't want to take away from the Canary Islands, but the cheese in the Azores is a highlight. They have a huge cattle raising. They call themselves the happiest cows in Europe because it's all natural outdoor, and because the weather in the Azores is conducive to having the cows be outside all the time. They don't have any barns. The cows are literally free roaming the whole time. The Azores population-wise is only about 3% of all of Portugal, but the Azores Islands themselves produce over 50% of the cheese consumed in all of Portugal. And each island has its own cheese. So like in this pictures, you see the São Jorge cheese, which is probably the most well-known outside of Portugal. But each island produces its own varietal, and each island produces multiple. So if you go into one of the cheese stores in the main town of Ponta Delgada, you can taste a dozen different cheeses, and they'll just give you a little scoop and taste it because they want you to fully understand. So And then as Nancy was asking about the Canary Islands and their main exports, which they don't really have as much, it's more wine related. The Azores, the pineapple is what is most exported outside of Portugal, and they export over 2 million pineapples a year.
Well, I'm very excited.
I could keep
Get
going
my
all night with this.
Dust off my passport and get ready. So I think I will close with that. I want to thank Erika so much for helping me out with this. It's just a delight, and
My
thank
pleasure.
you everyone for joining on this beautiful
you.
summer evening. I know it's been warm here in Maine, but so anyway, if
It's
anyone
wonderful.
else has any questions now, we're going to end shortly.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. And if you do come up with anything, just check in with Nancy and I can get you an answer or put something together for you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.